I don't know how much overlap there is between the listenership of this show and my readership at Baseball Prospectus. My terms at BP bookend the birth of this program, so I believe I have listeners who go back before that, and I probably have a bunch who've joined me since I returned. But because I'm unsure of that, and BP is paywalled and this show is not, I'm never sure how many people I might be repeating myself to if I go into too much detail here about something I said there or wrote there or vice versa. Normally, I try to keep them very distinct anyway, because everyone involved has the right to expect original material. As an editor, I've worked with people who seem to be selling the same article to more than one publication at the same time, which is not good. Or I once worked with someone whose articles seem to be, rather than independent things, just signposts pointing to their independent productions. And I don't want to ever be guilty of any of that, or for anyone to even have a thought about accusing me of that. So I'm pretty scrupulous, but I do think it's fair game when appropriate to take some similar material, thoughts that I might have had subsequent to writing about something or talking about it here, and expanding on it in one or the other place, because as I've said before, sometimes a story is more appropriate, more suited to BP's pages rather than infinite innings sound waves, and sometimes it's the other way around. It's not just a feel thing, but it's also a question of time, because some stories, as you know from listening to this show, this often long show, need to be delicately unpacked and then spread out all over the bed before you put them away in the drawers, whereas others can be told in a concise 1,000 or 1,500 word space. So what would be an enjoyable listen here would try your patience there. I hadn't intended to go into that much detail, but here we are, and the reason is that this week at Baseball Prospectus, this is a part I normally tell you later, well, I'm telling you now, I was struck by the incongruity of opening day during wartime. As you know, the baseball schedule is slowly unscrolling. As I speak to you, some of the first games are still happening or are about to conclude as I do this recording. Some teams are on their second game and some teams are on their first. As you well know, the nation is at war, and it seemed odd to me, wrong in a sense, that we're having what is a joyous thing at the same time as so much danger and risk to so many people, not all of them Americans, but certainly some of them. And what I wanted to do was see what that looked like in 1942, 1943, 1944, and 1945. So I simply juxtaposed some of the things that happened in baseball on those days and what was going on the various battlefields at the time, what people were saying, both in the game and outside of it. Now, because of the aforementioned limitation of space that I mentioned before, I should say I barely scratched the surface of what was going on in the outside world, or indeed in baseball. Most of those days, 16 teams were at play in 8 different games. There were 2 exceptions. One of them was simply that the Cleveland at Chicago game was postponed due to wintry conditions. In 1943, for reasons that weren't important for me to figure out, but I might guess it had something to do with wartime travel restrictions, baseball staged something similar to this year's Netflix stunt, one game, and it happened to be the Athletics and the Senators, 2 clubs that hadn't been terribly relevant for a while. That was 1943, and that gave me the opportunity to talk about some key players from those teams who missed time due to the war. Now, again, with more time, more space, and if I were writing a book, I would have done that for every team. I could have talked about, say, young St. Louis Cardinals ace Johnny Beasley, who won 21 games in 1942 with a very low ERA, and then was never good again because he hurt his arm pitching in the service, possibly even in an exhibition game against the Cardinals. Now then again, it's odd talking about pitchers in that context because it might have happened to him at any time, to any pitcher at any time, and it generally did, or does, even today. What's more acute are position players, players like Senators shortstop and third baseman Cecil Travis, who came up at 19 in 1933, and he had his last pre-service season in 1941. Not every player left as soon as Pearl Harbor happened. To that point in his career, he had hit .327 with a .381 on-base percentage and a .436 slugging percentage. Excellent, of course, for a shortstop. and he had just led the American League with 218 hits. You know that 1941 was Joe DiMaggio's big hitting streak. Cecil Travis had more hits than Joltin' Joe. Then he not only missed 3 years, but he was one of those baseball players who actually fought. In combat, in the direct aftermath of the Battle of the Bulge, you will recall that that happened in deep winter. He suffered frostbite on 2 toes, and either because of that, or simply because he had just spent too much time away and his skills atrophied, he couldn't get it going again and his career ended quickly. Then there's his teammate, Buddy Lewis, who flew air transport and supply in the Burma theater. An outfielder and third baseman, Lewis was only 24 years old when he left, but he'd been up for a while. So in 6 seasons as a regular, before the war happened, he had scored over 100 runs 4 times, while hitting .304 with a .372 on-base percentage and a .432 slugging percentage. And before you think those power numbers are low, you have to keep in mind that he played in one of the toughest hitters' parks in baseball. His home-road split in that pre-war period, when it came to home runs, 39 on the road, 14 at home. I'm not saying he would have been a 40-homer guy or even a 30-homer guy in a neutral environment, but the batting average would have been about the same as it was on the road, but he probably would have had fewer doubles, fewer triples, and several more balls pass over the fences. He had 1,112 hits at 24, and you don't have to be a savant to realize that he, had his career not been interrupted, would have piled up, assuming health, which we can assume, but all things being equal, at the rate he was knocking them out beforehand, he's probably missing, for the 3.5 seasons that he spent in the service, about 600 hits. And all else being equal, before we talk about anything else that happened to him subsequently, that would have put him at about 2,100 hits for his career. He also would have sailed past 1,000 runs scored, and for all I know, at some point, Clark Griffith might have gotten tired of paying him and traded him to the Yankees or Red Sox or someone where he would have put up even larger numbers. He returned midway through his age 28 season, and he could still hit. He still could play. He hit quite well in his first season and a half back, but then injuries set in, and he also, as he later admitted, kind of lost his motivation. Being in a war affects people emotionally. That's a very obvious thing for me to say. It can be hard to get up for even the privilege of playing a kid's game for a living if you've been through the kinds of things that these men went through. In short order, his career fell off and wrapped up. Now, we can't know, again, what would have happened had Travis and Lewis stayed, or Beasley or Ted Williams had stayed, but they might have been players. Well, Ted Williams still is, but the rest, who would have become, if not Hall of Famers, then at least remembered among the leading stars of their day, instead of subjects for obscurantists like me to bring up to you. And you might say, well, yeah, that's sad. That's somewhat tragic, but it was a just war, a necessary war. Remember Pearl Harbor and all that. And I agree, especially agree, when it comes to the United States of America being attacked. It's worth remembering, by the by, that the bit about war crimes and crimes against humanity, the Holocaust by Nazi Germany, no one was aware of that, at least for the most part, in public America in December of 1941 or prior to that. A lot of it hadn't happened yet. And even where there already had been mass killings, the public didn't know. What they did know, and this was good enough, was that Japan, Germany, and Italy had expansion on their minds, conquering a very different way of life from the one that was traditionally, historically, politically exercised in the United States and the other democracies, and they didn't care who they had to kill to do what they wanted to do. Further, they were already killing Americans, whether sinking our ships in the Atlantic or just attacking outright, as at Pearl, as in the Philippines and other places beginning that December. My greater point, though, is that whatever the justification, the loss of time is a loss, especially to an athlete. In the grand scheme of things, that's trivial. The baseball part is trivial. What isn't is the disruption, the deflection, and sometimes the outright termination of plans, goals, relationships, lives. And in war, that is suffered by everyone. It's a taking, regardless of how unavoidable it is, how required it is. It is still a loss. Last week, I was reading, of all things, Dune Messiah, the first sequel to Dune. Parenthetically, I am out as of that book. I just wanted to conclude the story of the main character of the first two books, and now I'm done. I don't need to know more. And should I choose to see the third movie, I'm prepared. I have my doubts about that, but I imagine I will at some point. The author, Frank Herbert, has his leading man remark that since our time is not fungible, not replaceable, that the difference between taking someone's time, an hour of their life, and taking their life altogether are crimes that differ only in degree or extent. In both cases, the perpetrator is winding your clock closer to the end in a way that you are powerless to recover. And that's war. Even if it doesn't kill one, even if one doesn't serve. I mean, think of all the parents who largely didn't see their sons, or in some cases daughters, for a year or 3 or more. This is something that is very acute for me as a parent myself to imagine experiencing that. And again, put aside the rightness of the cause or even the evil of it on the other side, and just know it's the fate of most of us to be toys in the hands of so-called great men. That's the theme, by the way, of Dune Messiah. Great men suck, meaning Timothée Chalamet, not the actor, but the character. In Buddy Lewis's war, Hitler, Mussolini, Tojo, Hirohito, Roosevelt, Chamberlain, Churchill, and dozens of people around them decided for us that this was what we were going to do. This was the game we were going to play. They weren't. They were in charge. They weren't going into the line. Ordinary people all over the world were going to do that, and even those who weren't in that group were going to have their lives disrupted or destroyed. Just one small corner of that war that I often think about. Preliminary to our brave, heroic invasion of Normandy in June 1944, the Allies returned to Europe. Don't forget, only the Russians were fighting the Germans on the continent to that point. Preliminary to that invasion, we killed a whole lot of French civilians with our bombings, which were meant to soften up German forces in the region and destroy transportation systems. And we did that on the theory, it was said then as it is said today, you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs, the eggs being human beings. And that's the value of life once we get this particular game off the shelf. And so it was a very small thing for ordinary people, like Buddy Lewis, to have a giant hand reach down out of the sky invisibly, pluck them off the baseball diamond, and drop them in a plane going over the Himalayas. I feel like very few of us around today have had the experience of being little kids and someone saying to you, "And what do you want to do when you grow up, Johnny?" And we reply, "I want to be a fireman. I want to be a police officer. I want to write comic books. I want to write Batman." And we start taking our toddling steps towards those destinies, or whichever ones we come up with once we're a little further down the line. I want to be an anesthesiologist. But suddenly, the king, the president, the prime minister, somebody just says, "No, you're going to take a few years away." And you know how in that great song, "Take Me Out to the Ball Game," we all sing, "I don't care if I never get back." Well, you might not get back. Life is what happens while we're busy making other plans. Ha ha. Thank you for those words of wisdom, Mr. President. I'm sure we're all very grateful and enlightened. And remember, not every leader was cavalier with the Buddy Lewises of their particular sphere. If German tanks rolled across their borders, they were at war whether they liked it or not, and the choice was existential, and the game was fixed because either you were going to fight and die or you were going to surrender and die. Wars of choice, however, of which there have been many in the history of most countries, including all too frequently the good old USA, are a very different matter. For the leaders, it's a game of civilization, but for us, it's about the smallest, most insignificant one of us whose life is altered by the decision to go forward. And then, as part of that, just a little side part of it, a Cecil Travis gets frostbite on his toes and doesn't get to take a run at 3,000 hits, or Joe DiMaggio doesn't get to rewrite some large portion of the record books, or in another part of the ledger, 100,000 GIs get Dear John letters, and their romantic and even genetic destinies are irrevocably altered. Yeah, their 4F so-called best friend Scott made time with Mary Sue while they were gone, and Mary Sue, she wasn't true. She went for that bastard Scott's line. And now Scott and Mary Sue are having kids that would have been Dear John's. All because that oily Scott was a disloyal bird dog, Mary Sue was lonely and therefore weak, and a fascist is just a serial killer with a uniform. And the kids will never know, but all of the rest of them, Cecil, Buddy, Joe D., Scott, Mary Sue, Dear John, and rows of headstones, have moved forever. Whatever plans they had made, their destinies had been irrevocably reassigned to the infinite inning. Well, hello there, and welcome back to the show. This is The Infinite Inning, and you are listening to episode number 368 in an ongoing series. Don't worry, there isn't the kind of continuity where you won't know who the characters are. The characters are, for the most part, historical ball players, and sometimes current ones, and sometimes other historical figures. As I always say at this time, I am your host, Stephen Goldman. I don't know how convivial I'm feeling. I'm feeling convivial towards you, but it is a difficult time for us to take our usual trip to the past on a mission to better understand the present. And oh boy, do we need to understand the present. The time machine, as ever, is the game of baseball. But what is there to say at times like this that baseball can reflect on? We haven't been in this exact spot before. A couple of hours ago, as I speak these words, the United States suffered more casualties. An Iranian missile and drone strike on the Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia injured 12 American troops, 2 of them seriously. My heart goes out to them and their families, and they have my urgent wishes and hopes for them to recover and be able to resume their lives without pain. This is exactly the sort of thing I was talking about before the overture started. We have an all-volunteer military at this point in our history, so to some extent, those 12 people chose to be there. I don't know if they chose to be assigned to the Prince Sultan Air Base at a time of war, but they did undertake the risk of signing up, and fair enough, but that doesn't mean that their lives or their health or their well-being should be spent lightly. And now they are, as the reports say, at least 2 of them seriously hurt. And of course, as you know from your own lives, any injury is painful. It could be a broken arm, which you would not call serious, but it's serious in the context of your existence and your own suffering. A cut finger could be serious in the context of your own life and your own suffering. As you well know, I traded the vision of one eye to be able to survive cancer. Is that serious? I don't know, but I do know it affects me every single day of my life, even though that was the obvious, correct move to make. But if someone had said to me, you're going to lose it just because you happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, or because someone made a decision, a not terribly well-supported or well-researched decision to put that eye in harm's way, not to mention the rest of you, I would feel very differently about it. Those 12, as you know, are not the first Americans to suffer in this war, and there are, of course, thousands of others throughout the theater of, well, the Middle East as a whole who have been hurt or killed since this started almost a month ago. I don't know how it's going to end. I just know that there's going to be more, given the constraints that we're in. To make far too light an analogy, there's a scene at the end of the movie Animal House in which one of the denigrated fraternity members, played, if I recall correctly, by one of the guys who actually wrote the movie, he leads an entire marching band down a blind alley, and they all kind of impact and pile up on the back wall. That's pretty much where our war policy, such as it is, has gotten us. I find myself thinking about something that I failed to do during that first run at Baseball Prospectus that I mentioned earlier. This is even before I was editor-in-chief, but I was editor of the annual book, as I was for 8 or 9 years. At that time, our last Middle Eastern adventure was in full bloom. We had soldiers in both Iraq and Afghanistan, And because the military had not adequately been prepared for the mission, there were a number of severe casualties. One constantly heard, for example, that our military transports, I'm talking about trucks, were not sufficiently armored to withstand an attack or explosive devices that might have been embedded in the roads. At that time, we undertook an annual tour to support the book, and Washington was always a big stop on that trip. In fact, it was the best stop because the wonderful bookstore Politics and Prose is there. And, well, not only would I speak, but I would buy stuff from the remainder section. We always got our largest crowds there. They do a fantastic job. So I knew I would be going there, and we also had some BP team members who lived either in Washington or in the vicinity, so it was easy to gather a large number of people for the event. And I got it into my head with the war on that we should go to Walter Reed Hospital and try to cheer some veterans, give out some books, talk about the upcoming baseball season, just casually do what we could. I said to publicists at 2 different publishers, can you arrange this? And they'd say, yeah, Steve, I'll look into it. But they never really did, I don't think. I called Walter Reed myself. I couldn't talk to anyone. I emailed and got no response. And finally, I happened to run into someone in the active military, and I said, can you help me with this? And first he said, are you really sure you want to do that? Some of those guys aren't a pretty picture. And I said, I think that's the least we can do if you think they'd enjoy it. And he said, yeah, I'll look into it for you. But again, I don't think he did, and I was unable to follow up with him. So we never did get to go there or anywhere like it. Maybe I should have called my senator or congressman. It didn't occur to me until, well, now. But here's the sad thing. It's good that it occurred to me because it seems like we're going to get another chance to do it. And just like then, I'm not sure what it is that we're going to accomplish in exchange for all of that loss. But I love talking about baseball, and if I can use that little quirk of mine and that of my colleagues to assuage someone's pain, especially pain that they received in the service of their country, whether I consider the decisions that were made to put them in that position correct or incorrect, I would like to do it. Before we turn things over to the inevitable break and then proceed to the second act of the show for a segment that, well, is kind of down, I guess, but I was struck by it and I wanted to share it. How often do I use that excuse? I've already told you what I did at BP this week, and I hope you will read it and check it out. I'll know if you leave a comment. I watch the comments. As you'll see if you look, I reply whenever there's a reason for me to. This week at Patreon, Dead Player of the Day Series 2 reached number 50. This week's quartet of players was Cleveland's slugging first baseman for 2 seasons, Ed Morgan, the Dodgers' momentary reliever Chuck Churn. I was just seduced by his name. 1927 Yankees catcher Pat Collins, whom Babe Ruth called Horsenose, and great Cardinals third baseman Whitey Kurowski. And at this point, I'm going to take a brief break of 1 week so I can get ahead again, and also because, as I described there, I have a tranche of doctor's appointments coming up. When you are a cancer survivor, as I alluded to earlier, there's a lot of maintenance you have to do, a lot of checks that you want to make because these things have a way of coming back. And forewarned is forearmed. I don't know if forewarned is really possible, but early is better than late. I'm sure you already know that. And somehow I've contrived to pile most of them into the same week or a couple of weeks. And so right now they're on this April-October cycle. The baseball season starts, I get cleared to watch another baseball season. Then right before the postseason, we do it all over again. The one benefit of that is that all these guys want blood work. So rather than my going to the time and expense of being stuck multiple times, I just do all the tests at once and then forward the results to whoever's name wasn't on the prescription that I supplied. Although I made a mistake when I did it about a week ago because I said to the phlebotomist, is there a name that's more misleading than phlebotomist, which sounds funny, like it's someone who makes balloon animals or something, but no, it's someone who sticks you with needles and takes your blood away. And I said, look, I'm going to give you 3 different prescriptions, but there's some overlap in what those doctors want. They all want, let's say, cholesterol. And I said, so please just take enough blood for 1 cholesterol test and send out the results 3 times rather than take enough blood for 3 cholesterol tests. And I am not kidding. She told me, nope, our policy is we take enough blood for all the tests that you give us, and then we figure it out later. And I'm sitting there watching myself exsanguinate. Did you ever read Robin Hood? Not the movies, which never go to this part, but the Howard Pyle book that really popularized the myth. He takes Robin right up to the very end of his life, and spoilers, he's kind of murdered, and in the most passive way possible, he lets a nun, an evil nun, I guess, bleed him out. He's supposed to be getting a medicinal bleeding, and she decides to just empty him, and he just lies there and takes it. Reading that as a kid, I was like, what? But here I was, just sitting there doing the same damned thing in a dilapidated strip mall medical office. At least he was in a priory or something. As always, I digress. I thank you for supporting the Dead Player of the Day series at Patreon and the show in general in whatever way you do, with your ears or by subscribing and reading the posts I have made. As I said before, 1 out of every 5 or so free. So even if you are unable or uninterested in subscribing, then please do drop by and read those. I think Ed Morgan was the one that I made free this week. I well understand, I've said this before, I hate the aspect of this that involves asking people to do this, because I'd rather just share it all. And I also know how many other writers and artists I like who are soliciting exactly these sorts of contributions in return for work that they can do with whatever skills they have. I'm constantly saying to myself, with an infinite amount of time and money, I would support this one and this one and that one, but I don't have either of those things. So I understand exactly what you're going through. And I well know we have many more listeners than we do have supporters at Patreon. So don't think that I'm mad at you or anything if you haven't done it yet. And I'm doing the best that I can do. I feel like it's inadequate. I'm very jealous of the artists, because what they often do is they'll have some great online series and they'll say, now, if you subscribe to Patreon, I've drawn all the characters for you, but naked. And I have as much, if not more, prurient curiosity than the average bear. So that is, if this is the appropriate word, I think it is seductive for me. But I still stop and I say, there are lines on a page, brother. I don't know if that's worth $75 for a year. You know what else you can do with that $75, don't you? Other than satisfy your curiosity about the lines on the page. Use your imagination, friend. I do not, as far as Patreon goes, have that particular arrow in my quiver. The best I can do is say that if you enjoy the stories I tell here, and you enjoy the idea of someone like me taking a kind of random player challenge and just trying to find something interesting or revealing to say about whoever comes up, someone like Chuck Churn, and that might be it. In fact, just the name itself. I went further than that, but still, to borrow from Abraham Lincoln, if that is the sort of thing you like, then you will like this sort of thing. And I do hope you will join me, because the more of that happens, the more of this I can do. It's really that simple. Just like everybody else, I'm under the economic and inflationary pressures. You know how it is. We're all in this together. And having said that, I think that makes a good segue into a break, because directly following that, we will travel back over 100 years to an occasion in which the Athletics found themselves all in it together as well, but for the most tragic of reasons. So resist, if you will, the temptation to hum to yourself, Chuck Churn, don't make it bad, and bear with me through this very brief intermission. And on the other side, we're Philadelphia bound. Lucky us. Let me say right off the bat that I acknowledge that this story, this thought that I'm going to explore at length, is rather maudlin, but it's also a truism that life inflicts terrible and inexplicable pain on us at times, and then it's over. And few things symbolize that for me more than an object that happens to be in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. You can find it online, and I posted an image of it to the Facebook group. I should put it on Patreon as well. Parenthetically, if you happen to find yourself in the area and you can visit the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, you absolutely should. If you've never been here, it's almost worth the trip by itself. I might even schedule 2 days just for that, because it's so big. And rather than rush through it and be exhausted. You might want to savor it in portions. There was a time in my life when I spent more time in the city and by myself for work. And if I had a spare hour somewhere, I would just make a quick run, throw on the headphones and go in by myself and just listen to music with the appropriate mood as I looked at the various items. And those were some of the happiest hours of my life, I think, in that category, whatever category you call that. In fact, I encountered this item for the first time on one of those trips. It's a stele, which is kind of a grave marker with a story included. It's not a whole one, a good chunk of one, as time has shattered it and misplaced some important pieces. It dates to about 400 years BCE in Greece, so about 2,400 years ago. It depicts a woman holding a baby on her lap. The inscription, I warn you, is gutting. It reads, "My daughter's beloved child is the one I hold here, the one that I held on my lap while we looked at the light of the sun when we were alive, and that I still hold, now that we are both dead. Don't go away, please. It's only life." What was her name? What was the baby's name? I don't know, and it doesn't matter at all. Both are universal. They represent all of us. And so, in different ways, does Harry Davis. Harry Davis was a first baseman, a slugger by the standards of his time. They called him Jasper for reasons that are obscure. He led the American League in home runs in 4 consecutive years, 1904, 1905, 1906, 1907. Of his 75 career round-trippers, 13 were of the inside-the-park variety, and he also had 4 bounce homers, which today would be ground rule doubles, but baseball was still figuring out some of these fine details. It was the dead ball era. Still, it's clear he was hitting them far to get those results. If we look at only isolated power, which is slugging percentage with the singles taken out, during the core of his career, which was 1901 through 1910, he ranked 10th among all players to have at least 2,500 plate appearances in that period, not too far behind Hall of Fame supermen like Wahoo Sam Crawford, Nap Lajoie, Ty Cobb, and Hans Wagner. Again, those guys were hitting 330, 350, sometimes 400. That wasn't Harry's bag, but a greater percentage of the hits that he did make were going for extra bases. Now, having said that, it would be an oversimplification to look at Davis and mentally translate his statistics into that of, I don't know, Steve Balboni or some other modern-day slugger. I think he was a much better hitter than Steve Balboni. First, we'd have to get to him in infancy, Philadelphia 1873, and give him some steak and sushi so he would grow up to be bigger than 5'10". More significantly, we would have to understand that despite his innate power, his entire approach would have been geared to the requirements of the dead ball era, and shoving him into a time machine and bringing him forward would, at minimum, require a great deal of coaching. Hit up, not down. For example, while Davis wasn't exactly a frequent bunter, he still laid down more sacrifices per annum than Aaron Judge has in his entire career, which is 0. And that's right. But again, different time for Judge than it was for Harry, when sometimes one base was all you needed. Davis had the kind of coming to baseball story that now is more typically applied to players from the Dominican Republic, and even there things have become so regimented it might not be wholly applicable. His father died when he was young. His mother was unable to support herself and her 4 children, so at 5 years old, Davis was taken from the family and placed in a school for orphans. There's some similarity to the later Babe Ruth story here, except that whereas the Xaverian brothers taught Ruth to be a tailor, Davis learned accountancy. He was apparently pretty good at it, too. Both before and after baseball, he was employed by banks, the Pennsylvania Railroad, and the city of Philadelphia. All of his obituaries say he was elected to Philadelphia's city council, but I can't find direct references to that. I think part of it is that midway through Harry's playing career, Philadelphia revised the way that their city council was structured. So whereas they at one point had something like several hundred guys on it, they went down to like 8. I think he was in the several hundred guys period. Speaking of his business acumen, later in his life, Harry said, "I guess if I'd stayed in regular business, I'd have made my pile, but I would not swap my memories for a fistful of money." as good as Davis's career was, and it included his becoming the first player in American League history to hit for the cycle, that happened in 1901, which was also the first season in American League history. He had the captaincy of the A's beginning in 1905 and was kind of an assistant manager, positioning the defense and so on. He had 5 years as a player coach with the team and a disastrous 3/4 of a season as manager of the Naps. He's still missing some time on the career side because he flopped as a National League player in the late 1890s. The gay 90s, not so gay for Harry. He first came up with the Giants and played more outfield than was good for him. Certainly his hitting didn't outpace his fielding. In 1896, the Giants gave up, traded him, in theory, mid-double-header to the Pirates for veteran first baseman Jake Beckley, an eventual Hall of Famer. Connie Mack notified Harry Davis as he came in from left field in the 4th inning, reported the Pittsburgh Press. Heck of a way to figure out that you've been dealt. Hey, buddy, no, not that dugout. Over here. You got to switch dugouts. You can get your clothes later. At the end of Davis's life, the Philadelphia Inquirer wrote, he could, and did, spin endless yarns of the days when he was home run king for 4 successive years, when he tipped younger teammates to Christy Mathewson's every pitch, when he enjoyed the distinction of having been the only player ever traded between games of a doubleheader. But see, that wasn't true. It was widely reported as happening, as I just related to you, during one of the games. The trade, by the way, wasn't Pittsburgh manager Connie Mack's idea. The owner made the deal. Beckley was pretty mad about it, too. Parenthetically, Beckley is credited with 2,938 career hits. He's there in the record book with Sam Rice, who finished with 2,987. They both had the misfortune to play before someone decided that back when Moses went up Mount Sinai and received the commandments from the Almighty, that somewhere on those tablets it said 3,000 is the holy number. No one knew. Moses didn't tell anybody. Then he smashed the tablets when he saw the golden calf. They must have missed those bits when they picked them up. They just left them there on the desert floor. Kids, it's arbitrary. There's nothing special about 3,000 at all. It's just something someone thought of one time and others picked up on it and said, yes, that must be the number. And I tell you this over and over again, as I do about 500 or 300 or any other damn thing, that human beings have designated as somehow foundational to our existence, though in fact they have no basis in science or history or anything. What else that we're taught to automatically believe is just made up? This is perhaps a digression, and I don't even know if it's true, because you can't trust anything you see online nowadays, even a video which appears to be legit because it might have just popped out of somebody's prompt to an AI. But I was looking at some nature type stuff on a sleepless night, and I saw a video of a sperm whale birth. And the sperm whales had teamed up around mom to help her with the parturition, and in particular, to lift the sperm whale calf, once it was out of the mom, up out of the water so it could breathe. And the implication was that those whales have a sense of community. And we know that they have pods, which is a community of a kind. And we know that they have language. And yet we spent hundreds of years hunting these poor creatures to the edge of extinction for oil for lamps, despite the fact that they have these qualities, which might be a hint and a half that we're not alone here. But we won't take the hint. I can go just up I-95 to any number of whaling museums, and it's like a monument to a vanished culture, yes, but also a monument to carnage. In Harry Davis's time, people really believed that the other living creatures on this planet were just toys for human beings to play with and to squash if they wanted to. And many of us still believe that. Harry Davis's day was also the day of the ex-bird on ladies' hats. We claim to be a religious animal, and yet some of God's handiwork was nearly extincted because some young women thought it would be cool to wear a corpse, and some men said capitalism tells us that we must open factories to pursue this and make our fortunes. That was true in Harry's day. It may or may not be true in ours. Conversely, 3,000 hits, not true in Harry's day, believed religiously in ours, but we might be just slightly more aware of the value and irreplaceable nature of our fellow inhabitants of this ball of mud. That wasn't exactly a digression, but this is, just let me say this before we throw to the second and final break of the episode. The sperm whale thing reminds me of this. The value of community, which is irrevocably tied to empathy. Maybe for the whales it's transactional, I don't know. You rub my whale, I'll rub yours. Empathy might be a step too far for an animal species. I'd like to think that it isn't, but I feel like I'd be accused of being naive or personifying them if I said that it were. However, I have often seen recently right-wing psychopathic types decrying empathy, saying that it's the worst thing that ever could have happened to the human species. Friends, it's the only reason the human species exists. It's the only reason that we developed stuff like language, which of course helped us develop our brains. No empathy, no cooperation, no communication. We would just have been solitary and kind of dumb creatures roaming about the African veldt and picking berries off of bushes. They don't like it because it's a restraint on their behavior. It doesn't allow them to be as rapacious as they want to be. They are essentially the descendants of the original robbers. When humans divided into farmers and hunter-gatherers, we also birthed the first people who said, I like what they're doing, but I don't like the labor of it. So once they get that rice in, once they get that wheat in, let's run up and hit them over the heads and steal their rice and wheat. Go watch The Magnificent Seven. Eli Wallach is playing that guy just in Mexico in the 19th or very early 20th century. I forget. Same idea, but guess what? That's a cooperation of a kind too. And that one is totally transactional, but still, it springs from the same ancient roots. All right, I need to get back to Harry Davis and the fact that the trade that sent him to Pittsburgh was not very successful for anyone, but it had a huge impact on his life. And I'll tell you why right after this very brief intermission. Go on out to the lobby, grab yourself an ice cream sandwich from the cooler. Tell them Steve sent you. I don't know what they'll say. Nothing nice, I expect. Now, where did we leave off? Oh, that's right. You were enjoying an ice cream sandwich. Did you get one of those that doesn't just have the gooey chocolate sandwich bits, but chocolate chip cookies? Because those tend to go quickly. As I said, the trade had a huge impact on Davis's life because Mack was Pittsburgh's manager. Their initial association didn't last long, both because Davis played poorly and because Mack was let go at the end of the season. I don't think those were related, except that Mack probably initially wasn't too thrilled to get Davis because Beckley was a much better player. But as a person, Mack loved Davis, thought he was a great player, had a fantastic team-oriented personality, and he made it a point to reacquire him when the A's came into being, which was a great thing for Davis because he was kind of in baseball purgatory at that moment. He actually had a good year for the Pirates in 1897, hitting .305 with a .359 on base and a .473 slugging percentage with a league-leading 28 triples. But the knock on his defense got him bounced from Pittsburgh to Louisville, which was a National League team at the time, to Washington in 1899, also a National League team, but only for about 5 seconds more. The National League folded Washington that year, so Davis had to spend a season in Providence of the Eastern League before Connie finally rescued him. He was 27 by then, and he only had 10 years before age beavered away his skills, but he made the most of them. I've already told you some of what Harry did once he became an athletic and finally blossomed. From 1901 through 1908, he hit .288 with a .339 on base percentage and a .430 slugging percentage, which, as Baseball Reference measures things, was about 30% better than league average in terms of production. In addition to his 4 home run titles, he led the league in doubles 3 times, peaking with 47. He also led in RBIs twice and runs scored once. Davis was not a Hall of Fame level player as we have come to define that, but he had more black ink than many players who do have plaques. That takes us from his age 27 season through his age 35 season. He didn't hit much after that, and increasingly was a part-time player or a coach who got into a game occasionally. You could do that then. He He also played in 3 World Series, 1905, 1910, and 1911, and came up a winner in the last 2. They didn't hand out World Series MVP awards when Harry played, and I imagine if they had awarded one after the 1910 A's beat the Cubs in 5, it would have gone to Frank Baker, home run Baker, who didn't hit a home run, or Eddie Collins, both of whom averaged 400 in the 5 games, or maybe pitcher Jack Coombs, who followed up his 31-win regular season by going 3-0 with 3 complete games. Harry was very good too, though, hitting .353 with 3 doubles and scoring 5 times. Beginning in 1911, Mac replaced the aging Davis with young Stuffy McGinnis, whose name I twice misread as Slutty in old newspapers while working on this story, even though I well know who he was. Sometimes it's fun having poor eyesight. That change from Harry to Slutty was the birth of the $100,000 infield, as it came to be known. Stuffy, Cocky Collins, Jack Barry, and Home Run Baker. Somehow Barry was the only one not to get a cool nickname, or a sort of cool nickname. Well, I guess he did, because his real name was John Joseph Barry, so Jack was his nickname. Does that count? It's not as evocative as Stuffy, Cocky, or Home Run. Davis dipped out briefly to manage Cleveland, but the team didn't accept him, and vice versa. They were some hard characters, and so he left mid-season and went back to Mac as a player coach. Harry played lightly, very lightly, in 1913, getting into just 7 games, though he did hit .353, going 6 for 17 in that tiny bit of playing time. Mostly he was a coach. The A's won the pennant and played the Giants in the World Series. Harry was entirely on the sidelines for that one. Stuffy played first base, and even if Harry had been eligible to play, I think he was, Connie Mack didn't use a single pinch hitter in the series. The Athletics won it in 5, but in the end it didn't matter, because the human condition intervened. World Series Game 5, the last game, had been played in New York on Saturday, October 11th. Harry, who lived in Philadelphia year-round, returned home to see his wife Eleanor and his 2 sons, Harry Jr. and Eugene, who I believe was called Ted. On Monday the 13th, Harry Jr. died at age 13. Victim of illness aggravated by his enthusiasm and joy at the victory of the Athletics, Harry Croston Davis Jr. died suddenly yesterday at his home, reported the Philadelphia Inquirer. They and his doctors speculated that he'd been suffering from some kind of ongoing liver complaint, and getting excited over the World Series had somehow triggered some sort of flare-up. He went to bed on the night of the 13th, woke up feverish, and passed away before the doctor could arrive. The Davises lived in, as I said, Philadelphia, just a few blocks from Shibe Park. I actually dropped a map in the Facebook group if you want to check out where they lived. It was a short walk. If you like the idea of ball players living in the neighborhood and walking to the game, well, Harry Davis was the man for you. And not just Harry. The nearness of his home to Shibe Park must have made his residence attractive to other players, and he put up several of them over the years. I assume he charged them for the privilege for taking them in as boarders, but either way, he had players living with him over time, players who became part of the family. So the A's knew and loved his son. His son was also around the ballpark a lot, just like players' kids today. He shagged flies. He also worked as an usher. Not a bad job for a kid in his first attempt at making a few dollars, showing people to their seats for what I assume were pennies or nickels back then. It beats the hell out of fast food. Point is, at least as much as other players' kids throughout time, if not more so, the Philadelphia Athletics knew Harry Jr. So, whereas I imagine a child in jeopardy is always a personal thing to a team or to a clubhouse, think of Freddie Freeman or Alex Vesia with the Dodgers in the last few seasons. This was like everyone had suffered the loss of a family member. Appropriately, the $100,000 infield buried Harry Jr. His pallbearers were not only pitchers Chief Bender and Gettysburg Eddie Plank, who had been, and I think still was, one of Harry Davis's boarders, but Jack McInnes, Eddie Collins, Frank Baker, and Jack Barry. The day Harry Jr. died, that is, before they knew that it had happened, the Inquirer reported on the winter plans of the various A's. Harry would remain in the city, the paper said, but first he was going on a duck shooting and fishing trip down the river on the sloop Connie-Mac. I imagine he didn't do that. Life is too often like that. Is it trite to say that it tends to dash your plans by assaulting them with tragedy? It probably is, and maybe this is trite too, but I'm struck by how long ago all of this was and just how long everyone involved has been gone. Harry, as I said, was born in 1873 and has been gone since 1947. Eleanor died unexpectedly in 1925, age 53, after contracting pneumonia. Their younger son, Eugene, was also described as dying unexpectedly in 1953 when he was 49 or 50 years old. That was 73 years ago this January. There's a picture at Find a Grave, which I often use to try to figure out some details of these stories. It purports to be the resting place of all of those people, but either it's been totally overgrown by grass or it's just not there. A caption on the picture by the person who posted it says, "No monument." Was there a monument at some point? I don't know. There's just a plot. 5 miles and a trip across the Schuylkill River from where Shibe Park used to stand. Harry Jr. passed over 112 years ago. Functionally, it's the same amount of time as the woman and the baby on that stele from 400 BCE, except that we know his name and a few more details of his story. But from the missing grave to the way that time so rapidly erased the family demonstrates, for me, the mercilessness of the river in which we all swim. The past is kind of like a fire hose, and if you're not paying careful attention, and it's impossible to pay careful enough attention, then you might miss stories like this. There's simultaneously no reason to know it and every reason to know it, because similar to what I was saying about 3,000 hits or the changing status of whales, which may have been optimistic, it's important to understand the capricious and arbitrary way in which our lives are shaped and spent, and not just by other people or people in power, although as we've seen, there's way too much of that, but just random happenstance. You win a World Series, you lose a child, and they're not connected except by a kind of unthinking cruelty, an unmotivated unthinking cruelty that just happens. And yet, they kind of made it Harry's fault. And I know this is a dour story, and I'm sharing it because I was deflated by it. I was all set to tell you this story about this cool late-blooming player, has 1 more home run title than Aaron Judge and 3 more rings. You can't say 3 times as many because you can't multiply by 0. And then, just as he had been at least a small part of winning that 3rd ring, not only did he lose his firstborn son, but the doctor said that the very act of winning it had so overstimulated his kid as to cause his death. And yes, that sounds suspect, but we can't be sure that Harry didn't take that as the truth and blame himself. He had over 30 years to live with that loss, and that seems like too long. 5 minutes seems like too long. I'm not just being cute or punching the button on my catchphrase when I say that this is the nature of the infinite inning, that so many of our victories are in some way tinged with loss, despite what you hear about gray clouds with silver linings. All too often, it's the other way around. Silver clouds, gray linings, black linings. And having to accept that whatever we do, there's a toll keeper, the leering skull leaning out of the booth, who demands payment for all our joys with coins of sorrow. Man, why do I put us through this stuff? I hope you're okay. I'm okay. I hope you understand and empathize when I say that I'm happier knowing that story than not knowing it. Should you wish to converse with me on this or any other subject, you can do so on social media at stephengoldman.bsky.social, and you can write us, by which I mean me, at infiniteinning@gmail.com. There remains a Facebook group You go to Facebook, you search on Infinite Inning, and bang, you're there. As I said, I put up the map of Mr. Davis's neighborhood and a picture of the evocative stele from the Metropolitan Museum collection. Should you wish to support the show, and I very much hope you do, please visit patreon.com/theinfiniteinning. And on that note, I gratefully acknowledge the joining up of Jerry. Yay, Jerry, thank you so much. Gear of a rudimentary kind, available at the -infinite-inning.creator-spring.com. Original soundtrack available gratis at casualobservermusic.bandcamp.com. Finally, should you find yourself with the proverbial moment to spare, please go to the podcatcher of your choice and rate, review, and subscribe. And if your podcatcher doesn't let you do those things, I lost track of what I was going to say when the cat who lives under the microphone walked in front of me, so I'll just say adopt a cat. This time of year, there are always plenty of animals up for adoption. You've seen Bambi, right? Nature, unfortunately, can be like that in the spring. Our theme song, which you are hearing now and have been listening to throughout the episode, was a co-composition of myself and Dr. Richard Mooring, who says, "What, you expect me to say something cute after a down show like that? Get out of here." Well, I think I'll take that advice, and should I be able to avoid stumbling into any holes as I go, I'll be back next week with more tales from inside the Infinite Inning.